So I'm going to go ahead and kind of do a quick introduction, if you will, of everyone that's here on the call today. And then we'll go ahead and jump into what's on the agenda. So good morning, everyone. Without any further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and let Renee Stevens start us off. So Renee, good morning to you. If you just want to introduce yourself real quick, we'll let everyone say good morning to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Renee Stevens. I'm the CFO with the Tucson Jewish Community Center.
Good morning. Thanks, Renee. Thanks for joining us today. And then Chris Blue.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Chris Blue with the City of Tucson.
Hi, Chris. Good morning. And then Meg Knight.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Meg Knight. I'm the grant writer with the Tucson Jewish Community Center.
Hi, Meg. Good morning. And then Steve Nath.
Hi, good morning. I'm Steve Nath. I'm the operations manager for Hope Inc.
Great. Good morning, Steve. And then Shaylin Turney.
Good morning. This is Shaylin. I'm the executive director with Project Amor.
Great. Hi, Shaylin. Good morning. And then Luz Navarrete.
Hola, buenos días. Luz Navarrete here with Tran.
Good morning, Luz. Luz, I'm going to have to take a tutorial on how to pronounce your last name correctly. I apologize.
No worries.
I'll connect with you offline and we'll practice it a little bit because I need to do better. I'm sorry about that. And then John Hawbaker.
John Hawbaker with Transit Services in Oro Valley, and Mike Alexander is also on.
Oh, good morning, John. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning.
Okay. And then Nicholas Trees.
Hi, everybody. Nick Trees, La Frontera, Transportation and Facility Supervisor.
Great. Good morning, Nick. And then Francis Antone. Good morning, Francis. I don't know if you have audio this morning or not, but we're going to go ahead and say good morning to you nonetheless. So welcome. We're glad to have you. And then I thought I saw Travis Leduc on.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, hi.
Good morning. Travis Leduc, the Director of Support Services for the Tohono O'odham Nursing Care Authority. Thank you for having us.
Great. Thank you, Travis. Good morning, Francis, too. Anyone else on the call today that I may have inadvertently missed?
Mandy Hendricks.
Hi, Mandy. Good morning.
Good morning. I am a director at Easter Seals Blake Foundation, overseeing all of our transportation services.
Great. Good morning, Mandy. Anyone else on the call today that I may have overlooked? An accident? Anyone else? All right, great. I think we have everyone. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for assisting me with the introductions this morning. We're happy to have all of you. Just as we navigate this meeting today, just if a question pops up or you have concern, of course, you can always put it in the chat, but encourage you to use the raise hand prompts so that I'll do my best to see those and kind of respond accordingly. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda, which is in-kind reporting. And so with our regional planning efforts, they're enhanced by recording time that's donated by attendees, volunteers, and any participants. We collect that data on the time dedicated to meetings and any activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. And so if you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know now so that we don't include that time. So time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. And of course, at the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. And so time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So that is our in-kind reporting. So if you are paid through federal dollars, please let us know. You can either put in the chat or send me an email. Either way would be sufficient, just so that we make sure that we report in kind correctly. So thank you so much for your help on that. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. So we really want this to be a discussion. And so I know some of our meetings have more of a like a presentation feel where I'm doing the majority of the talking, and then as time permits, we allow for questions and discussion. But my hope for this particular meeting is for really it to be just an open dialogue and discussion about the two different items that are on the remainder of this agenda. So we're going to try to coordinate a discussion on information resources and accessibility. And so if you've had an opportunity to look at our regional coordinated plan, if you were to look under the section that I believe is entitled Advancing Regional Coordination, there is a section or subsection that is titled Accessibility and Rider Support. And so in alignment with that, this discussion on information resources and accessibility is part of that. So in the agenda that has been posted, some of the sub bullets, if you will, are elements related to support and rider advocacy, information and referral, travel training, case management, and then of course, peer, volunteer, or staff support. And so those are kind of like the key elements, if you will, that can play a really vital role in how we navigate our ability to advance regional coordination under the veil of accessibility and rider support. So that's kind of the overarching theme or goal of our discussion, is how can we as a working group work towards the goal of advancing coordination with a very strict mindset, if you will, about accessibility and rider support, and what does that look like? And so as a kind of a leaping off point for discussion, right? So we can start to say to ourselves, what does support and rider advocacy look like? What do we want it to look like? What should it look like? What are some of those key pieces that everyone should be thinking about or agreeing on as we look to increase accessibility and rider support in our region? What are the different tools or resources that we have for providing information or referrals within the region for people that are needing our services, especially with regard to transportation? Travel training, of course, is a big component, and we have some travel training being developed right now. So we're excited about that. And so we can kind of have a good discussion about what that might look like in the future and what things are important in that space and what considerations go along with that. And then what role does case management play in all of this? So as a nonprofit provider of transportation services, you may or may not work with specific case managers throughout the region, but just taking a step back and saying, what role do they play? How can we work smarter or better with them as we look at this particular component? And does it make sense to kind of bring them into the fold of the conversation? And if so, kind of like at what point, and what would be the heart of that discussion? So kind of be taking a look at that today. And then of course, as we look at our own peer support elements within our organization's volunteer support efforts that we have throughout the region, whether it be in-house or with Pima Council on Aging or a host of other organizations throughout our region that have a really strong volunteer base. And then of course, our own like internal staff and support. What does that look like? And again, all tying back to information, resources, and accessibility, but under the larger arm of accessibility and rider support. So I'm going to just kind of stop there and kind of open up the floor for discussion. And you're welcome to pick any element within that and say, you know, here's kind of what we're thinking, or here's how I think we should, you know, approach something at this stage. So I'm just going to open up the floor. And since I do see one hand raised, I'm going to go ahead and say hello to Sean and let Sean introduce or do an introduction first, and then leap with the question, the comment. So Sean, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for allowing me to join the panel.
Yeah.
It's great to get to join this group, and I'm just basically first time. I'm going to listen in. I'm going to offer what I can, and but I find it a privilege to be able to join the meeting. I'll have to jump off around 11 o'clock, but I'm glad to
Sure.
take part until that time. So
Great.
I'm the assistant general manager here at Sunban. I've been here in this role about 3.5 years. And we're quite busy these days with providing service based upon our demand. We're also having challenges with our manpower. So, but all of these elements that you mentioned are really important, I think, really, and touch on all transportation entities in the region, maybe some more than others, but we certainly, the one thing you mentioned is rider advocacy and support, and the travel training. I think we've taken a little part in that for a little bit in recent weeks, and kind of increased our efforts there with Luce Navarrete at Suntran. And so we're interested in enabling or empowering our passengers to make that transition to fixed route, or just to expand their opportunities in transportation, so that they have the confidence that they can make that transition. So that'll be a major focus for us going forward. So that's a little bit about myself and where we're at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much. I was taking some good notes there about, kind of your heart on this and some of the priorities that you mentioned. So thank you for sharing that. And we're great to have you here this morning. So Mitchell, I see that your hand is raised as well. And so I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself. I apologize if I missed you earlier. And then go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, I didn't have a question or comment.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I came on about 2 minutes late, so you probably missed me because I was a little bit late. But thank you, Janine. My name is Mitchell Escritt. I am the Director of Marketing and Development at Beacon Group. I am relatively newer to working on the 5310 grants. It's only been about a year for me, but Beacon Group has been participating in this for a very long time. And we really appreciate this program. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. Glad to have you this morning.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right. All right. So we're going to go ahead and Francis, I think I see Francis, you have your hand raised. Hi, Francis. I don't know that I can hear you. So I'm going to go ahead and not put Francis on the spot and see if some of the audio challenges can be resolved. I'm going to kind of ask for my IT team to see if they can reach out and see if there's anything we can do on our end, or at least assist a little bit on their end. So if Jeff or Crystal, if you're available to support Francis in that way, that would be fantastic. So Francis, we're going to try and see what we can do here. Okay. I see Luz's hand is up.
Hello. So I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit of the travel training that we have already done. There's actually a couple groups in here that we've already been working with, Beacon being the majority one that we've done a lot with. So just so everybody knows kind of what we did with them already, we held, I think, 3 in-classroom sessions with their clients where we went through this really great travel book that we created. And we sat with them, we jotted down their addresses, we trip planned, we saw where they wanted to go, places they wanted to go. We talked about how to ride, fixed transit, so our Suntran fixed routes, we mapped things for them. And then after we did that, a couple weeks later, we came back at the Suntran bus and we took them on a ride and we played what I call bus bingo. So we went from the group, which is on Oracle and Fort Lowell, I'm pretty sure, Glen area, and we went to the Tohono Transit Hub that we have there at Tohono Transit Center. And on that route, we gave them each little bingo cards, and they had little spaces showing just everything we were passing so that they could pay attention to their route, because that's one of the bigger things is that people get on the bus, sometimes they miss their stop because they're not really aware of where they're at. So when we're playing bus bingo, they really have to be watching the landmarks, watching things around them so they know when to stop. And a lot of those things too are bus stops. Like, did you see that bus stop? This is when we could have stopped here. So that's what we did with the Beacon group. And we specialized it to them. So we worked really a lot with their WOOFs program to really make sure that we were catering our class to them. And then Project Amore in July, we did a big streetcar tour with them. So I took them along the streetcar and we went through the entire streetcar. We talked about different things. Streetcar, there was a lot more younger children on this, like grade school kids. So we had just kind of different like little games that we played along the routes. And then we took them to actual Sunlink yard to look at the yard and where the streetcars are and just talk about safety tips. So with that said, those are the travel training programs that we are doing now. And everything that we do, we really make sure to cater it to the program that we're working with. So whether it's grade school kids, clients that need maybe more different needs, like we really try to cater it to our clients. So if you guys want to connect, feel free to reach out. Like, we're happy to provide this service for everyone.
Thank you, Luz. I think I see someone else's hand raised or wanted to connect on some way. I think I might have clipped someone just a moment ago. So someone trying to share. Okay, I'm hearing things this morning. I'm sorry. So Luz, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate you kind of painting a picture. And I see John Hawbaker's hand up. So I'm gonna go ahead and let John have the floor. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Mike and I were just talking too. We didn't know if we could reach out to Sean or somebody, and if I don't know if it'd even be feasible or a good idea, but maybe have a little seminar up here for the writers that are close to the 401. I'm trying, advertising, trying to get people and encourage people to come to some kind of a event like that, and maybe open up their knowledge base about what's available to them writing the 401, and then down to the SunTrans system.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to mention that before, like in 2019, we used to go out and do like sun go karts too at one of the churches there in Oro Valley, and we used to get a big turnout for that. So yeah, it would definitely be something we could do instead of some kind of training, or just like a fun event to have people come and learn what their options are.
All right, that'd be great. Maybe we can work on that.
Yeah, I'll connect with you guys.
John, did you still have your hand up, or? Okay, just want to make sure. I didn't know if you had any others. Oh, okay, great. Thank you for sharing. That's really great. So what else do we have, like, as feedback or thoughts under this larger category of accessibility and writer support? So we've talked a tiny bit about travel training and things that are really going well and what's been happening, and then of course seeds for what we'd like to see happen within different organizations, such as Town of Oro Valley for like 401 route. What other elements can we impart some wisdom or thoughts around with regard to like information and referrals, other components of support or writer advocacy, the case management piece that I alluded to earlier, anything having to do with the way we make the most of peer support or volunteer support or even internal staff support, because the larger goal, of course, is advancing regional coordination. So how do we make the most of those opportunities to make that happen? So I'm just going to kind of open up the floor on that. Oh, I see Meg's hand. I think it's Meg's hand. No.
I don't think so. I may have hit something inadvertently.
No,
Sorry.
you're good. You're good.
Janine, this is John.
Hi, John.
Could you expand a little bit more to try to get our brain cells working on exactly what you're looking for here?
Yeah, pulling up the coordinated plan here. Bear with me for just a brief moment. So when we look at the coordinated plan, and if anyone wanted to kind of like follow along at home, right? Not that this is a game show. There is a section in the coordinated plan, I think it's 107 or something to that effect. And it's entitled Advancing Regional Coordination. And chart P, I think is what it's referred to, is it talks about kind of an overview of the challenges within the region with the aim of advancing regional coordination or even interregional coordination, because we have like the Seago region nearby. So if we look at that, there's different categories and a kind of a regional focus, some of the challenges, and even a coordination opportunity. And so if we were to scroll down in that table, there is a section known as accessibility and rider support. And the focus, if you will, is about increasing accessibility for seniors, those with a disability, low income, or limited English proficiency. And so if we were to kind of take a look at that space and say, what are some of the challenges or perceived challenges in making that happen, we can also extrapolate out opportunities for coordination, right? And so if we kind of peel back the layers of that onion, if you will, and make an argument that there's perhaps like 5 components that bode well in creating some lift or being a catalyst in some way to further those opportunities or build upon those opportunities, but most importantly, to bridge whatever the existing gaps are, right? So if we were to break them down into 5, right, we're going to say arguably that the focus points is about support and rider advocacy. What does that look like for us to advance coordination? So let's say, for example purposes, right, when you, being Town of Aurora Valley, you look at the needs of your client base and what the level of support is and what rider advocacy means and looks like and gets carried out as, you might have your own definition, right, what you look for. But another agency might say, well, our client base is slightly different based on their needs or their challenges. So we actually do everything that you're saying, but then we take it to another level, right? Or if we have a slight modification to that approach because of the unique needs of our client. So if you and I, meaning Town of Aurora Valley and I, this other organization, we were to try to coordinate together, we would have to kind of try to figure out a way to kind of meet in the middle, right? We have to agree on what the standard of care is, if you will. We have to agree what rider support looks like, what advocacy looks like, so that we could get some more people in our region and do it well together. So in that spirit, right, of advancing regional coordination, if we were to try to just take that one layer, that support and rider advocacy piece, what does that look like, right? How do we meet those expectations so that we can look to a day where we're actually coordinating together more fully? And sometimes coordination is very foundational, meaning like we're just laying the foundation so that in a distant future we can do something more. But for right now, our efforts to coordinate are just to get on the same page about what our policies are or what our guidelines are. Maybe our discussion is only about that. But for other organizations who've already kind of worked together in that space and they already have that level of agreement, they might be ready to take the next step with regarding advancing coordination. And so their building block is going to look a little different, and they're going to have a slightly different conversation. So regardless of where people are in that stage of development, if you will, with regard to coordination, those types of conversations are still important and vital to the larger discussion that we're trying to have today. So that's just one piece of it, right? So then the other pieces are obviously, how do we as different individual organizations, but also as a working group, how do we communicate the different information that's available to people who have a need for transportation services. How do we provide referrals? So we have a lot of organizations that are very client-based, right? They only provide transportation for those that are clients or members. And then we have other organizations that are, for the most part, entirely open to the public, although there might be some eligibility criteria that has to be met. And then we have other agencies that are kind of somewhere in the middle. The majority of their work is very client-based or member-based driven, but however, they do have a component of some of their programs that are in fact still open to the general public, right? So what does that look like if people were to need more information about services or need a referral in that space? And if we're going to advance coordination, what does that look like? The last part, or I shouldn't say the last part, but the next part would be the travel training. So right now we've kind of unearthed these pieces, and how does that tie back into travel training, and what are some things that should be considered to be added in to the travel training, right? So we're doing like the bingo, we're doing other components to make sure people are aware of different bus stops and what's coming next, and other elements that are very vital that we're already doing. But what are some pieces that we might not have thought of, or what's some pieces that we can make it be a richer experience? And then for case management, which is kind of what I alluded to a little bit ago, is like, does it make sense to bring case managers into the fold, depending on what extent your organization works with case managers? So I'll give an example. If someone's getting discharged from a rehabilitation center after like a hip surgery, right? And maybe it's not a long-term need for transportation services, they just have a temporary need while they're healing to get to follow-up care appointments, et cetera. What does that look like? How would they get referred to an agency that may be able to provide them with services? And if we're going to work together, in a coordinated effort, what do case managers need to be aware of, and what kind of dialogue takes place in that space? And then the last part on this 5 bullet point list, if you will, it would be the peers and the volunteer support or staff support. So some organizations have a really strong volunteer base, or they're trying to grow a volunteer base and they want to keep them plugged in and actively involved in their organization. Others want to make better use of their staff time and support, or maybe they're short on staff and they could benefit from coordinating with other agencies to kind of bolster their efforts during this gap in staffing. What does that look like, right? So those are kind of the pieces that I've kind of bullet pointed out to say, here's kind of a starting framework for us to have a discussion about how do we begin to achieve some of the goals that are outlined in the coordinated plan under the category of accessibility and rider support. So I know that's a really long-winded answer to a short question, John, so I apologize, but perhaps it is helpful in terms of helping us kind of have like a rich discussion about this and see what makes sense. So hopefully that was helpful. Was that helpful, John? Not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just really hopeful that it was helpful.
That was very helpful. Mike and I were talking, as you brought up things, generated thoughts in our own minds of different kinds of things. So thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Because if it wasn't helpful, I would want you to tell me. I would want you to be honest, so I could say, okay, let me try it again. So I see Francis. I see you. Hi, we got technology working. I'm going to go ahead and put you on the spot. I just want you to be able to say hi since we finally got, it looks like we might actually have audio for you now. I don't hear you though. Are you on mute? You're not on mute. Oh no, we still can't hear you. Well, we're still happy that you're here. We'll keep working on it. We're halfway there. We can see you. You might have to put up a flashcard, like write on it with a Sharpie, and we'll hold it up to the camera. We'll be flexible. We'll keep working on it. Thank you, Francis. All right. What other comments or questions does the group have that could help further the dialogue or the discussion on this particular topic. I understand it's really broad and there's a lot of moving parts, and that's kind of what makes it hard, or hopefully a little bit easy, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about.
This is John again.
Hi, John.
One thing I was thinking is sometimes we take clients to some of the programs that are also represented here, like Savvy and other agencies. And I don't know if it would be necessary or even worthwhile, but just the thought would be if those agencies, let's just break it down, make it simple, like Savvy would say, look, when you transport people to Savvy, you need to be aware of these kinds of things that our writers, that our clients would need when they're writing your vehicle. Maybe we could work with them. I know this is very simple and basic and probably not what would happen, but they would say, look, when you're helping some of our people who are impaired visually, this is what you need to be aware of, kind of stuff. So.
Okay. No, I think that's a great start. I think that's a really good start. So I appreciate that. Because sometimes what's obvious to one person isn't always obvious to someone else, right? So I think it's always helpful to have those kinds of conversations. So it's good. Nicholas, I see you. Hi.
Yeah, hello. Hey, for me, I think all the bingo and the training and everything you guys offer is a great resource for us. But I don't think I've ever seen a communication come through my way that I could just easily share with our case management and recovery teams. So if there is any of those kind of resources that you guys are working on at any time, to shoot them out my way, and I'm sure that we would love to participate in all that.
So let me ask you this, Nick. Help us understand what makes it easy to share. What kind of format? What are you looking for? What's helpful? What's not helpful?
Either just a brief description or some kind of flyer, something that I can just grab and send out company wide, and we'll have, 500 plus staff, in Pima County here looking at it, and they love resources to share. So, a lot of times we do those trainings ourselves, but as a new hire case manager straight out of college, they might not have those skills themselves. So it'd be a great opportunity for not only our members, our disabled individuals, but the case management team to learn and better serve their populations as well.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask this question. So we have organizations from across the region, which is great. We're all on the call today. There's going to be a lot of buckets where we all face similar challenges, right? Similar values on different things, but there's going to be some things that are just like inherently different. And it could be based on the clients that we serve, but it also could be based on where we serve in the region. So we have some agencies that are serving primarily in like the urban core, right? And then we have other agencies serve or in the rural areas. And then we have some agencies that are kind of serving in both, right? And then there's like some agencies that serve very, very rural areas of our Pima County. So I'd like to kind of open up the floor a little bit and hear what are some of the things that are kind of in this space when we talk about advocacy, when we talk about information and referrals, when we talk about how do we best use staff, peers, et cetera. What does it look like to make the most of those opportunities if you're serving in a rural area, and kind of compare and contrast it to what we'll hear through discussion of how do you make that work well in an urbanized area. So I'm going to kind of start with rural first, put some people on the spot. So Francis, you're off the hook because you can't get your audio working right now. So I'm so sorry that it's not working. We're going to figure it out though. But you and I could talk offline and get all the great thoughts and stuff that you wanted to share today. All right. So I haven't forgotten. We'll circle back. So let's see if we can hear from some of the agencies that are serving in rural areas. Some thoughts. I'm going to call on you.
Well, I think the number one challenge for those of us that are in the rural areas is fixed route isn't necessarily going to always work unless we have a very dedicated rider base. So I always think of either educational or school connections, right? So that's, and looking at that. And then while there may be a lot of opportunities in the urban areas to connect, we may be the only partner, being the partner of one in the surrounding areas. So trying to, and then you mix in the additional complexity for our situation that we're in the center of a tribal nation, which is good in terms of having an opportunity to partner, but we also border Maricopa County as well. So there's also that county line and Pinal County as well. So our situation comes with a lot of additional complexity that can be a benefit, but it also really, it makes the pool of potential partners very shallow. So I hope I added something to someone that, or something for someone on this call that they didn't already know, but I'm pretty sure if you're in that rural isolation, you're struggling in the same way that we are, looking for those partners to, because you can coordinate by yourself, but that's not really coordination. That's just making a plan.
True. So if you were to share with the group, and again, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, so you don't have to answer it. You could just say like, let me get back to you on that. That's a totally acceptable answer. If you were to share with the group, like some low hanging fruit that says like, hey, if there's some agencies that can help us with this, this would be a great place to start. What would it be? I think you're on mute, Travis. Still.
I'm going to get the shirt that says I'm not on mute, I'm just refusing to talk. No, I should have kicked the can on the answer. No, I would say if you're asking me that question, I would look for additional workforce related support for transportation for staff. That would really, if we could, and being from the north coming down from Casa Grande, from the east coming from Tucson, and the west from Ajo, if I had those dialed in with our workforce, that would be amazing. Is that low hanging fruit? Not really, because I don't have anybody to put on the transportation asset yet. So it's the chicken and the egg problem that we're dealing with when it comes to, do you stand up the transportation resource first, or do you get the personnel in line and then stand up the transportation resource? That's kind of the dilemma we're up against. But yeah, so I hope that was low enough hanging fruit.
No, I think it's a good place to start, because if there's other agencies that are facing similar challenges, even though they may not be serving in rural, and then we can kind of have that bigger question of, which came first, the chicken or the egg, to use your kind of analogy. But that might be a way for us to coordinate or collaborate together to kind of start solving a problem at space, and then working from that with the other components that tie well into it. So I think it's still has a lot of merit and is good. So thank you. So anyone else experiencing something similar, even if you're not, serving in a rural area? I don't see any hands going up, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. I might just not see it. Any other agencies serving in a rural space that would like to share some of their challenges or thoughts about what they are experiencing serving in a rural area, as it aligns with the category of support and rider advocacy, or accessibility and rider support? I apologize, I said the wrong word choice. Oh, Steve. Hi, Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Yellow. Yeah, we've had mixed experiences. We've had good experiences in some areas with some collaboration. And we're urban, small urban, and extreme rural. I imagine being on the edge of urban is probably even tougher when there's like nothing and then everything's in one spot. In some of the areas, we've had really good collaboration with other agencies. So if they've been down a vehicle or they need their riders picked up, we've been able to do some work with that and help them out with pickups and transports and stuff. We worked really hard to get connected with most of the insurance providers, because what we were finding when we tried to get members to use the providers that their insurance says they're able to use, it just wasn't really a reliable situation. We had members left at the program, 5 o'clock at night. We're taking them home because that didn't work. We've had other agencies where they'd call us and say, hey, we're not going to be open on Friday. Can you go do a wheelchair transport for us? And we're like, yeah, we can grab that, or vice versa. So it just depends on the area. But the more rural you get, the less reliable that becomes. A lot of good transportation possibilities and collaborations in Tucson proper, and even Sierra Vista proper for us, because we're all over. But again, we're experiencing that same thing as out in the rural areas. There's just not that many people. Or, if you're in Douglas, you might have to wait for somebody from Tucson to come if we don't provide the transportation. So that's what we run into is and then the other problem our members run into is, like, getting to us, we're not considered a medical appointment, so they don't guarantee timeframes.
Oh, okay.
So, programming starts at 9 o'clock. They may not get there till 11:30 because the transportation company didn't deem it a medical necessity.
Now, Steve, thank you for sharing that. So I know you serve in multiple regions, and obviously the scope of our discussion for today is, for in the PAG region, but I know there's other agencies that, much like Travis was sharing, how their service area, right, can transcend into other regions. There's other organizations that they too serve in other regions. So I think, especially for rural agencies, there's an opportunity to see how some of the agencies that are serving in a similar space can potentially, see how they can help one another. I'd be curious to know if other agencies across the board are experiencing similar challenges when you talked about not being able to guarantee times because it's not considered a medical appointment, and what could potentially be done to help that story change, in terms of being able to have a little bit more assurance of when people would be picked up. We are talking about different populations that could be, are more vulnerable than others. And then, of course, in our region, the weather and heat and stuff like that is always something we have to be cognizant of. So I think that would be a good conversation to start forming, perhaps as like a side group, if you will, like several organizations who want to kind of have that dialogue separately. What other contributions can we make to this discussion, whether you're rural or urban? I haven't asked the urbanized areas yet, those serving that space, but some of their thoughts or challenges are under this particular topic. So I'm going to kind of open it up to those that are serving either in both or primarily an urbanized area. So I don't hear too much at this point, but I'm going to kind of throw it out there. I'm going to just go throw out the case management component. So some of you might work with case managers, some of you might not. As we look to advance coordination and help people who might be like somewhere in the gap, right? Like they don't currently get services from a particular organization, so they're not considered a client. They don't necessarily meet ADA eligibility requirements, but they are still looking for transportation, and they have some mobility challenges, or they meet the FTA's definition of elderly, or even maybe like sensory challenges, just different things. There could be a whole range of needs, right? So if we're trying to serve people well and kind of expand on way we're able to support people in our region with regard to transportation, and trying to look at that accessibility and of course the rider support component. What are your thoughts about bringing case managers into the conversation about how do we begin to look at not just the needs of those individuals, but also like where is there an opportunity to serve those folks that are kind of perhaps caught in the middle, right? They're not a member, they're not a client, they're not necessarily ADA eligible, but from serving elderly and disabled populations, whether it's because they have a mobility challenge or they're over 65 based on FTA's definition of elderly. How do we begin to meet the needs of those folks? Does it make sense to start bringing case managers into the conversation? What would that conversation look like? I'm open to people's thoughts on that. And I am looking at the time, so I'll open the floor for this particular point for a little bit longer, but because I want to make sure that we leave enough time for the next item on our agenda. So I'm going to kind of put John and Mike and even maybe Sean a little bit and lose on the spot a little bit, just because you serve kind of in a different space, if you will, than a lot of the nonprofits. To hear your thoughts about what conversations might make sense to be had, if at all, with case management personnel at different hospitals, et cetera. For the reasons we just mentioned, because a lot of what you share obviously has a direct impact on services you provide, much like for the nonprofits, but also there's that travel training component. So from a travel training component, I'm curious as to what might be learned or discovered through conversations with case managers that would help us create an even richer experience on travel training, whether it be in the short run or the long run. So curious on your perspective on that, if you think it would add value or what your concerns would be. So I'm going to open up for Luz and Sean and John and Mike.
Sure. So I think definitely knowing where your clients are going, like needing to go to, is the most important thing that we have to know when helping. So when we're working with any type of organization, that's the important thing for us to know is where are your clients coming from and where do they need to go? And that helps us see, one, is there a viable fixed route that we can get them to that's easy for them to do? And two, is there a really like a large amount of people that are having to do this type of transportation? And are we able to group them so that we can move, 5 people at the same time rather than going back and forth to the same area to do that? And I know that's something really important when it comes with Sunvan. So Sunvan is always able to help, but that's important for them to know, like, okay, if there's a population in this area, let's group them together and pick them all up and take them at the same time. So we need to know if there's that flexibility with the case manager with, are we able to kind of group their appointments a little closer together? What can we do to make that easier on kind of paratransit if they are going to be doing that type of service rather than a fixed route?
Okay.
And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Sean.
And I apologize, I left Chris out of the mix there too. So Chris, the same for you. I would want your input and feedback too. So go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I think that what I was thinking is that I think if agencies, whatever agency they might be, that serve elderly and disabled populations or medical entities as well, I think if there was just knowledge as to where they can, where they can go, how they can refer their clients or the people that they're serving, for instance, to the ADA office if they need to be qualified for paratransit service, because that's really where it starts for us at the ADA office. But as Lou said, even if they know that they can contact Lou's or the organization for travel training service, and then we can kind of assess from there, okay, so-and-so is having issues perhaps making that transition. So maybe they would need to have paratransit services. And so therefore we can refer them out to the ADA office for qualification. One population I think I'm interested in is the refugee population, and wondering how are they getting connected? How do they even know, or how do the agencies that serve them know about the transportation options available to them? And maybe Luz can speak to that. I don't know what contact we've had with refugee agencies, because I know that there are quite often there are refugee populations being introduced into Tucson, and that's just, to me, that's a population I think that could definitely be either underserved or ignorant of the unaware of the transportation options available to them.
Okay, thank you. And I heard a little bit of, obviously, efficiency and, like, I guess you could say density, right? How many can we make sure there's as many riders at one given time versus maybe just one, just so that you can make the most of resources and staffing and, of course, transport more people. I would imagine that if you're serving in a rural area, much like Travis spoke to, and you're making trips of great length, it extrapolates out, the need to make the most of staffing and resources, and each trip really has to count. So as we being a greater group of us, right, as we look to find ways to collaborate and make the most of our resources, if you're serving in a rural area, I would really encourage people to reach out to folks like Travis and Francis and others that are serving in rural areas and see what opportunities exist to really make the most. And then tying back to what Steve had shared about, concerns around, certain types of appointments, they don't necessarily get a guaranteed time because they're not considered medical. Whereas there are opportunities to kind of help address that. So, and that of course is for the whole group, but in your rural areas, people serving in rural areas face some very unique challenges. So I don't want that to get left unspoken to. So I'd encourage you to reach out to each other. But Sean, thank you for your feedback on that, and same with you, Luz. I think there is definitely an opportunity to see what populations aren't fully aware of those types of services and how to get connected to the ADA eligibility office. And if that starts with some of the case managers that are working with those populations, that could be a great place to start. But also other agencies here on this call might know it's a contact as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I was just going to mention too, Janine, if you wouldn't mind sharing out my email and with the group.
Sure.
That way, if anybody is interested in having us providing those services, or sharing information with your case managers, I'd be happy to make some really good targeted materials for your individual group as needed. So please just reach out to us. We're always looking to help different organizations. So
Okay,
yeah.
great. Thank you so much, Luz. And then I'm going to come back to Chris to let him have an opportunity to share anything that he wanted to share. But I saw Travis's hand go up. So go ahead, Travis.
And see, now I'm unmuting. My hand went back down, so I'll lower my hand. But in terms of the case managers that I would recommend, well, at least that pops into my head, are Altex case managers. That would be the ones that have the intimate knowledge of the individual, and they should have an idea of what their transportation needs are looking like. So that would be one of the ones that just popped into my head. So
okay, thank you for that.
My hand is down now, correct?
It is down.
Okay.
Well, your thumb's up, but the little icon hand is down. Yes. 2 thumbs up. All right. Thank you so much, Travis. Appreciate you. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. I don't really have too much to add. I think, Luce and Sean hit the nail on the head. We always want to make sure that we're sharing information about our services and ensuring that that information is reaching our target audiences, populations. That's something that we're actively working on, that Luce is working on, and we're hoping to see that continue to grow. Also understanding that those resources are limited, and so when feasible, we want to make sure that we're channeling individuals to the appropriate mode, be it fixed route or paratransit. That saves on costs for us. It also ensures that our services remain efficient and function at their highest capacity. So that's pretty much it. It's an ongoing work in progress, but Luce and Sean and their teams are doing a great job, particularly with some of the mobility management initiatives that have come to fruition in the last couple of years. I think they've made a significant impact, and we want to continue to build upon those.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think everyone can kind of relate to a lot of things that you said about, resources are limited, right? You only have so big of a budget. You only have so many vehicles. You only have so much bandwidth. So how do we be really intentional and focus on it to make the most of it? And of course, pointing people in the right direction, whether it's within your organization or perhaps if they're better suited to be referred out. What does that look like? And I do appreciate you sharing those insights with us. And Travis, to your point, I think the Altex case managers is a good place to start. So I appreciate that. I haven't heard from John and Mike yet of Town in Aurora Valley for any thoughts that you might want to share. And then we're going to go ahead and transition to the next item on the agenda. So John and Mike.
Hi, Janine. This is Mike. We had a meeting, transit working group, I think it was Sunvan or Suntran, doing surveys with the riders that are using the bus system. Mm-hmm. Maybe they have, I don't know, but have they tried looking into the employers that these riders are going to, and then doing surveys with the employer to see how can they get more people on the bus, and why don't they use it currently? Again, maybe they didn't even know it exists. So I know some of those they were talking about on the express routes. So asking the employers or doing surveys with the employers themselves. And then second, next month we have a meeting to go over how to use our system with one of the assisted living locations here in Oro Valley. So having more of those, just going out there and telling people, okay, this is what we do and how to use it.
Very good. I think that's a good point. I mean, it's good feedback. I mean, there are people of all different backgrounds and different levels of mobility, et cetera, and accessibility that are going to places of work or even educational spaces. And if plugged into what's available to them or don't have the travel training that they need because they're not aware it even exists or whatever or whatnot, it's definitely something that we can help bridge a gap on. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to go ahead and transition to the next item on our agenda. So the next item on our agenda is with regard to a discussion on forecasting projects. So for those of you that are considering applying for funding in federal fiscal year 2023, typically the NOFA will present itself in January. It's just kind of a historical data point. It can change, so don't hold me to that. And for clarity, when I refer to that NOFA, we're talking about those applying for funding in the PAG region, because if you're applying for funding in the MAG region, the dates and timeframes are very different. So we're specifically talking for those applying for funding in the PAG region. So with that being said, I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit about those forecasted projects. And so as you may recall from different emails and just things have been for a while, right? It's always important that those forecasted projects are listed in our coordinated plan and then provided to ADOT. It is one of the requirements. It is one of the things that ADOT will look at to see if your forecasted project you're applying for funding for is actually in our coordinated plan, has to be listed. So you've probably seen emails from me asking for your forecasted project, which means as of today, you know, this is our best guess of what we think we're going to apply for. You may choose to not apply for it. But if you are going to potentially apply for it, definitely needs to be listed. So right now, the deadline for that is end of this month, which means it's going to be around the corner. There is a chance that it could get extended out, but for right now, we're going to hold tight to that date so that we have time to follow our own internal process for putting in the coordinated plan and getting it to ADOT for right now in advance of when the NOFA comes out in January. So that is what we're planning around. But one of the things that you're probably aware of or should be aware of is that throughout the whole grant application process, you know, they do look for alignment with the coordinated plan. So how well does your project align with the overall goals, et cetera, of the coordinated plan? So if we're looking at the coordinated plan, there is a section that's referred to as regional goals and associated priorities, right? So taking a look at that will be very helpful planning process, but also the way that you navigate the application process, meaning answering the questions that are in the grant application. And then also there is a section, I think almost directly beneath it, that's about funding priorities. And so you would want to take a look at that because it does spell out kind of the priors associated with how funding gets used as we go through that grant cycle process. So in order to stay within the scope of what's on the agenda and not have scope creep and go out too wide, because this is a very broad topic and I have to be careful that I stay within what is intended to be discussed based on the agenda. So what I wanted to do is just really bring your attention and have a discussion perhaps around what is referred to as the regional goals and associated priorities, or how it ties into that section of the coordinated plan, but around the 5 bullet points, if you will, of newer expanded service, support for transportation services, how to better serve the needs of the general public, coordination of transportation, and then somewhat of a recurring theme, that information and resources to include travel training. So if we were to go to the coordinated plan and look at that particular section for forecasting projects as it pertains to like regional goals and associated priorities. And you're welcome to kind of follow along at home, so to speak. And so if you're looking for kind of a earmark in time, page number, if you will, I think it's around page 114, somewhere like that. There's a section that says determination of regional goals and associated priorities, and then it has regional goals and associated priorities. And so when you look at the different categories that are part of that mix, those 5 elements that I shared, the new and expanded service, support for transportation services, those came straight out of the coordinated plan. So if we're looking at that, you'll see the associated priority given for each subset, if you will, related to each. So for example, purposes only, right? If you were to look at the one that says new or expanded services to meet identified gaps in rural areas, right? You'll see that there's an associated priority for each. And then if you were to scroll down a little bit further, it says new or expanded services to meet identified gaps in urbanized areas. And so there's an associated priority of what the needs are in the region, right? And how funding could arguably be spent. So, so when you're thinking about your forecasted projects and how that funding would be used, I want to take a look at how that aligns not only with the regional goal or strategy, but also its associated priority. And so with that, you can also use that knowledge and insight to how you would speak to it in your grant application, right? Because those are the pieces that they will look at in your grant application. So, but sticking to the scope of the agenda, the biggest message in that is when you determine your forecasted projects, make sure that you've looked to see, is what I'm potentially going to ask for funding for, A, in alignment with the coordinated plan, and how does it kind of measure up or align with these particular goals or strategies, but obviously also the associated priority, right? So I wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. So that is the first item, if you will. If you were to scroll down further, you'll see the next one that says support for transportation services. And so you'll notice that there's different subcategories, if you will, within that. So you have quality of services training, broader vehicle selections, mobile vehicle maintenance options, directory of resources and providers for referrals, and then of course, driver training. So if you have a project that's in alignment with creating that level of support for transportation services, and those are kind of broad topics, right? So we could extrapolate out what that looks like, and that would be a whole other conversation. But from a where to start, if you were to have a project that was associated with that, that's something you would want to give pause around and take a look at. Does it match any of those elements? Does it fit within the associated priority? Next part says better serve the needs of the general public as per on our agenda. So if we're looking at that, you'll see how it talks about different sub elements, right? Increasing access to community services such as food banks, access to healthcare or mental health, coordination efforts to support meal or food delivery or access to grocery stores. There is elements about improved coordination with paratransit, which is a lot of what we've touched on a little bit today. And then increased access to like social activities. And so I know John had mentioned also connecting with assisted living facilities in terms of how to use different resources. I know Luz and Chris and Sean talked about a whole host of things that are related to how can we improve access to different things. And some of it starts with travel training. Some of it starts with ADA eligibility, right? There's lots of pieces there. And then if we were to go down next, coordination of transportation, one of the elements, and then of course, information and resources. So when we talk about coordination of transportation, you'll notice there's a section that says regional coordination of non-client rider groups. And so that's really one way to articulate that we're talking about how do we increase access for people that aren't currently clients or members, they're from the general public, how do we to meet those needs? And that also ties in well with how do we make sure that they're getting information and referrals so that if it is the best option for them to become a client, particular organization, we're at least helping them still get the support and services they need, but we're not alienating necessarily people that aren't going to become clients or members for whatever reason, and they're members of the general public, but they still need accessibility to transportation, right? So how do we coordinate with non-client rider groups? And so if we were to look at that, there's kind of a different priority, if you will, in terms of where we focus on different needs throughout the region. So how do we serve well people with a physical disability or a developmental disability, and then it keeps going. And so that's just something to be cognizant of. And then there's kind of a strategy prioritization within that. So they're not necessarily in silos. It's kind of a collective look or approach. So when we look at strategies for prioritization of coordination of transportation for non-client riders or the general public, we've identified some different elements. So gaps in transportation services due to hours or location, meaning like non-traditional work schedules. There's people that have some gaps in that space, bridging first and last mile gaps to connect with public transit, people that are ineligible for public paratransit but still have some mobility challenges, and then to include any kind of volunteer driver transportation programs, those that are 65 or and over, and then of course low income. So those are some elements. So again, if you're looking at your forecasted projects and you're trying to evaluate to what extent does it align with some of the identified gaps or goals in the coordinated plan and the associated priorities, these are the places that you would want to look to see if there's a match, so to speak, right? If there's alignment. And then for peer and volunteer and even staff support, if we were to scroll down, there's the section about information, resources, and of course it includes travel training for transportation services. And so the way that we use information and resources, and I apologize, I said peer and volunteer and staff earlier. When we look at information and resources, that's where this ties in. And so we're looking at what are the efforts to better meet the needs of those 65 and over? What are the efforts to meet the needs of those that are deaf or hearing impaired? What are the efforts to meet the needs of those with a physical disability or a developmental disability? And kind of the list goes on, and you'll see kind of what the identified needs are in the region and perhaps the associated priority. So again, they're not necessarily in silos. It's just kind of a holistic view, if you will, but it's important to kind of understand if you're looking at a specific sub-element, what is the associated priority for that particular sub-element. So again, just making sure that you're kind of aware of what has been outlined in the coordinated plan so that when you're kind of declaring your forecasted project, you can have a lot of confidence about how it aligns with the coordinated plan, but also you can start to prepare well for how you might speak to it in your grant application. So we have a little bit of time left to have a discussion around any forecasted projects, and some questions, you know, based on the nature of the question, it would be inappropriate for me to answer it in this platform because some questions I actually have to vet through ADOT to make sure that I'm answering it appropriately. And also, I want to make sure that if I was to answer a question that I know enough before giving an answer. So I'm going to ask for a lot of grace if I say a lot of the time, like, let's just circle back on it one-on-one. Because I want to be fair to the process. I want to be fair to each individual asking a question. But if there's some like high level questions, broader scope type questions, I perhaps feel a little bit more comfortable answering in this kind of platform. I don't have a problem with that in this space, but anything that's perhaps a little bit lower level or very unique circumstances, I prefer to just kind of do it one-on-one to make sure that I'm understanding the context appropriately and asking for guidance from the right resources before giving you any counsel, because I don't want to speak out of turn and give you bad advice. So, right. So, so let's have a little bit of discussion about forecasting projects. And I think a good place to start is acknowledging that, one, there are agencies that perhaps are applying for the very first time. And so their level of awareness about this process is going to be very different from an agency that's applied in the past. So I want to make sure we open up the floor for those types of questions. We also have agencies that, while they have applied for funding many times before in the past, their staff has changed, or the role of who typically applies for funding or is navigating that has changed. And so it's new to them. It might not be new to the organization, but it's new to them. And so I want to be fair in answering those questions. And then we also have folks that are very seasoned. They have championed this before. They've done all the grant writing. They've been through the process of preliminary awards and exhibit A's and all the stuff that comes with it. And they're going to have different questions. So I want to be fair to everyone in answering any questions that we have, as long as it stays within, the goals of the agenda or what's on the agenda, but also asking for that grace that says if we really need to talk about it offline, that we do that, so that we be fair to the person asking the question. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor. Any questions or thoughts? Hey, Steve, go ahead.
Hopefully an easy one. So on the worksheet,
Yeah.
funding projects would be capital purchases, preventive maintenance, and operational. Those would all be considered different fundings projects, correct?
Well, let me see if I can answer that well for you. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there are capital projects. And so sometimes those are considered what they call traditional capital projects. For example, like a vehicle, right?
Right.
And then there's other types of capital projects, such as like preventive maintenance funds, or non-traditional capital, if you want to call it that, might be like a camera for a vehicle, right? I'm just trying to come up with something on the fly that would have an appeal to a broad range of people on the call today. And then there is a category of funding for operating, definitely. And then there's also a category of mobility management. So there's that as well.
Okay.
Yes. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And then just to throw you off, did you ever get any feedback on the possibility of capital projects for EV stations?
I haven't received any feedback, but you know what? That's a great reminder. So I'm going to put in my little tickler file and send it to ADOT and see what the thought is on that. I don't have any feedback yet. I know you had asked that along with your lift question, which we'll circle back on because it's not in the agenda.
Okay,
I'll get you an
thanks.
answer. Did you have any other questions, Steve?
No, that's I'm good to go.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, if you come up with another one, feel free to ask it. What else? Other questions? I know we got a broad range of folks on the call, and I want to be fair to everyone. Like I said, I want to be respectful to those. This is their first time navigating it. So if you have a question, please ask it. And even if you feel awkward asking it, I would still encourage you to ask it, because one, I want you to get the information you need. Two, it's always a good reminder for those that have been through it before to hear kind of the same answer again. So there's nothing wrong with asking it. So if you have a question, please ask. And then if you feel more comfortable, of course, you can email me or call me. We could talk through it. The spreadsheet hopefully will be helpful to you that you received to kind of compartmentalize, if you will, all your different projects. It might, if appropriate, if you're applying in other regions, it'll help you have a place to go to put those pieces in there. Although don't send me those projects, just save them separately for when your other mobility manager asks for them. But but hopefully it's a helpful tool. So I am going to bridge a tiny bit. Steve, I'm going to come back to you. So when we were talking about the new or expanded service, right? A lot of people, when they apply for funding under new and expanded service, one of the most common project types is asking for a vehicle, right? And how that vehicle will be used is going to be defined by whether it's new service or expanded service, right? So if you have questions about vehicles in advance of doing your forecasted project, please email them to me, and then I'll do my best to navigate that with ADOT to see if we can get you some good answers so that we can fine tune any elements that need to be fine tuned in forecasted projects for that. And Steve, I'm going to go ahead and let you ask your question or provide your comment.
Just a real quick question on the spreadsheet you sent us, the worksheet. It says 2023, but you're actually looking for both 2023 and 2024, right? For what we're looking. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you for asking that. So the grant cycle is in 2023, right? Federal fiscal year 2023. So that's how it's characterized. But a few years back, ADOT made the switch from a 1-year grant cycle where you would apply for funding every single year to a 2-year grant cycle. So while you'll be applying in federal fiscal year 2023, you're applying for both years of funding for 2 years. So the next time you would apply for funding is going to be in 2025. So yeah, so you will have on your spreadsheet, you'll have projects that you're forecasting that you're going to apply for both year 1 and for year 2. And then you will also be asked to give a priority to each. So let's say you have 3 projects for year 1 and 3 projects for year 2. You're going to prioritize which is the most important to you in year 1, which is the second most important to you in year 2, and what's the third most important to you in year 3. And then if you had 3 projects in year 2, you would do the same. This is my priority number 1 for year 2. This is my priority 2 for year 2, and here's my priority 3 for year 2. What you don't want to do is just number them 1 through 6, because then I have to go back and say, okay, he wrote priority 4, but it really means your priority 1 because that's a year 2 project. You don't want me to have to go through all that for all the different agencies that are applying and made that kind of an error. So just make sure you have a priority 1 for each of your respective years. If that makes sense. We had some agencies do that on accident last time, and I remember having to go back and make sure that we understood which was good. We caught it early, but it's time consuming and stressful, especially when the clock's ticking on the application and stuff. So I'll make sure we don't navigate that again if possible. Any other questions? So so here's what I will say. So everyone should have received the estimated cost sheet, if you will, for vehicles, if you are applying for a vehicle, right? So back to Steve's point about, or question rather, about the different categories of funding. So that spreadsheet where I'm asking for forecasted projects is for all types of projects. And there is a drop down that asks you to pick basically the funding type, like, are you applying for a vehicle? Are you applying for newer replacement? I guess is probably the better word choice there. Are you applying for preventive maintenance, operating, mobility management? So you should be able to select what funding type, if you will, you're applying for. And it does also ask for your priority, all that good stuff. It helps you calculate local match. But what I don't want to have happen is people think that the spreadsheet is only for people that are applying for vehicles. That is not true. It's for every single type of project that you are applying for funding for, regardless of what funding type. So if you're applying for operating, you fill out the spreadsheet. Applying for preventive maintenance, you fill out the spreadsheet. If you're applying for a vehicle, you fill out the spreadsheet. Applying for mobility management, you fill out the spreadsheet. The vehicle inventory cost sheet is more just, if you happen to be applying for a vehicle, you have kind of an awareness of what the historical data shows on vehicle costs. So you can kind of extrapolate out and figure out ballpark, what your local match be. So I wanted to share that for the obvious reasons, because it's important to know. But two, if you remember a few years back, what vehicles cost and now what they cost today, if your local match is a percentage of that cost, and you get a surprise because vehicle costs went up more than what you had anticipated, it can also equal a surprise in what your local match responsibility would be. So I want everyone to be able to go into it eyes wide open and say, here's a tool that will help me forecast what I think the vehicle cost would be and what my associated local match would be. And I made some recommendations about I would at least add in at least this % per year. But you can make that a higher percentage if that makes you feel more comfortable for budgeting. I'm just encouraging people to at least at a minimum add in that percentage at a minimum. So if that's helpful, I just don't want anybody to have surprises on local match a year from now, 2 years from now, because they thought prices might stay static or they might come down or whatever. I'm just encouraging people to plan accordingly and try to go into it eyes wide open as much as possible. So please fill out the spreadsheet regardless of what funding type. And if you have questions on how to fill it out, or if you're filling it out correctly, feel free to ask me. Yeah, and then if you have questions about how it aligns with the coordinated plan or anything like that, especially if you're brand new to this, please read it out and ask, because I want you to have the support that you need. You can feel free to call me on my direct line at any time. That's not a problem. Questions, thoughts? Mitchell, I know you had asked a question, I think, about the spreadsheet. So maybe we'll circle back, and it might not have been you, it might have been someone else. So I might just call you later and see if I can help answer that question if it was in fact you. If not, I forgot who it was, but I thought it was you that might have asked. Any questions or thoughts around that? Okay, so in closing, since we are talking about forecasted projects, you will see an email from me with some more reminders about forecasted projects, but also the other things that are going to be very important as we lean into that grant cycle opening. So some of it will be a repeat of stuff that I sent before, and you're going to think it's old hat, but I just don't want anybody to forget to do some of those things, because it can add a lot of stress at the last minute if they aren't into play. So like it's not called a DUNS number anymore, but like a DUNS number, it's expired and you have to get it, resurrected, so to speak. That could be really stressful. So I'm trying to make sure everybody does not make that mistake. Same with e-grants, everything's in e-grants, logins, passwords, all that stuff. So while it's not in the spreadsheet for forecasted projects, it directly impacts your forecasted project, because you won't be able to apply for that forecasted project if e-grants is not working for you. So we want to make sure you're set up for success on that. Questions about the forecasted project process? Anything that we've talked about so far before we wrap up? All right, well, if you have any questions that you feel more comfortable talking to me about one-on-one, feel free to call me, email me. Do my best to help you answer that. I am so thankful that all of you carved out time today to be a part of the coordination group meeting. And Francis, next time audio, it will work for you. I promise we'll figure it out. So maybe you and I will circle back and we'll see what might have went wrong and why you don't have audio, but I'm still really grateful that you were able to join us today. So thank you. Thank you to Travis. Thank you to Sean. Nice to see some new folks be a part of the call. Thank you to everybody that was on the call today. So I'm grateful. Thanks for all you do in service of others, and have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.